Hello and welcome back for another episode of the weekly mentorship series. I'm your host, Dr. Omid Azami. In this week's episode, I wanted to tackle social media and the role it plays for dentists in terms of branding, in terms of learning, and look at some of the positives and negatives of social media and the impacts that it's had on our profession over the past few years. I've had a big, long history with social media myself. It's meant a lot to me in terms of, growing the podcast, growing the audience for the podcast. When I first started Instagram, getting onto the dental Instagram side of things, I remember it was in my final year of dental school. And at the time, it was quite a small community. You kind of knew most of the bigger dental accounts. And one of the ones that stood out, obviously, was the Bloody Tooth guy and was an early, mentor in terms of content and consistency, and the whole bloody tooth thing was a big deal for me. And I started posting all my extractions during dental school and got into Instagram community and the dental community through Instagram that way. When I graduated dental school, I started obviously the Noobie Dentist Podcast, and Instagram was instrumental in growing the podcast. All the guests that I had on the podcast in the early days would be other dentists who are quite active on Instagram. And it was an amazing community that I was able to establish and, develop friendships and mentorships from dentists from the United States, from Australia, from Canada, and throughout Europe as well. So personally, for me, there's been a lot of positives of Instagram and social media. And I think that a lot of dentists are, reaping those benefits now. However, it's not all positive. I think there are some downsides to social media as well. I remember when I moved from Australia back to Canada, I had to wait a few months for my APRA, my, Australian dental license registration. And there was a period of about 2-3 months where I wasn't working or I wasn't allowed to work. And for me at that point, being on social media and seeing dentists from around the world producing work, people who are considered my peers or equals in terms of career progression, working and producing and getting better and better and posting that content, I personally had a bit of a hard time dealing with that. And I chose to take a bit of a small holiday and get off, Instagram for that period of time, just so I wouldn't have that negative reinforcement day after day. In terms of the positives, I think it's bringing the community together. Dentistry by nature is quite an isolating profession. We go to work, we sit in a practice in our cubicles or in our surgeries, and we see patients and we get into our own habits and into our own routines. And what Instagram has allowed and Facebook has allowed and YouTube have allowed is that we get to see what other dentists are doing around the world, how they're doing similar procedures day in and day out. And that is really opening our eyes to the possibilities of what is available to dentists in terms of materials, in terms of techniques, and how we can improve as clinicians ourselves and provide better value for our patients. This effect, there's a term in psychology called the social multiplier effect, and I think this really applies to dentistry as well. One example of it is basketball, for example, where with the introduction of television and the airing of basketball games, there was a marked improvement in overall ability of even children picking up basketball because they get to see professionals day in, day out doing the advanced tactics and maneuvers that their friends won't necessarily be doing. And by practicing those tactics and moves and tricks and shots, they bring it to the playground. The kids around them see them doing it. And then overall, the baseline level of skill in the sport improved. And I think the same is happening in dentistry. We are now able to see not only what we do day to day, we see what our friends in our same town are doing, people in the same country, and people internationally. And we see this day in, day out. So this one shows us what's possible. 2 lets us develop these visions of what we can accomplish ourselves. And 3, if we choose to enter into this community by posting our content and putting ourselves out there, we get some feedback and we get some criticism and we get some encouragement as well. But this allows us to be more accountable and to grow as clinicians. So overall, I think social media has been a net positive for the industry. It's allowed us to connect as a profession. It's allowed us to raise the floor of what dental services to patients should be and improve the overall standard of care, which I think only is a positive for the industry. In terms of negatives, I think there's that FOMO effect, or that people doubting their own abilities or doubting their own skills. or people thinking that they can do these procedures without putting in the effort or the amount of hours of practice that some of these masters have put in before they incorporate it into their own practice. And they get frustrated because they can't reproduce the same quality of, margins on their crown preps or the pristine, soft tissue work or suturing skills of the bloody tooth guy, for example. And it gets them down. So I think it's important to keep that side of it into consideration as well. Use social media as a tool to improve, as a tool to reach out to mentors, and as a tool to, if you want, put yourself out there and make yourself accountable to improve by posting your content and keeping that library of your work there for the public to see, and also for your peers to give you feedback on, which I think is really valuable. That's it for this week, guys. I hope you enjoyed this week's mini mentorship series in terms of social media. If you have any thoughts or comments, please, if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment below. I'm trying to grow the YouTube page. It's going quite slowly compared to the podcast. But if you do watch this on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe and hit the like button. It helps, I guess, get a few more viewers for the podcast, for the video portions of the podcast. For the podcast itself, I have to thank everyone so much for continuing to support. This month, August, has been my best month in terms of the podcast ever, and I'm super grateful for the listeners for their ongoing support. And I'm excited to bring you guys, more of these great contents, more great interviews, and grow this podcast to new levels. Thank you so much, and we'll check in with you next week.
Thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Noobie Dentist Podcast. Please be sure to subscribe and head over to iTunes and give the show a 5-star rating. For all show notes and to access all previous episodes, head over to www.noobiedentist.com. Have a great day.